Dort for the win. It's good! Pokuševski takes flight as SGA plays through the contact, banks it in on the foul.
What is up, Thunder fans? Welcome to the Uncontested Podcast, post-game edition. This is your boy Tayler Peterson, Tayler_P15 on Twitter, coming to you live. As unfortunately, after last week, the Thunder go on a big win streak of 4 straight. Thunder are now on a losing streak of 2 straight as they drop the second game in a back-to-back against Miami Heat, 103-90. But before we dive into this game, we are a proud part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network and the official podcast of SI Thunder. So be sure to check both of them out. But like I said, unfortunately, the Thunder dropped this one to Miami. But it was a fun one. It was a fun game, and I think there's a lot of fun things to take from this. So I'm excited to kind of dive into that with all of you. I think the first thing is there was a couple things that came up before the game started. The biggest, I think, being on the Miami side. Both Bam Adebayo and Jimmy Butler both were out tonight. Jimmy's been out the past couple of games, I believe, with an ankle injury. And Bam has been, dealing with some knee soreness. And you can't really blame the Heat, for wanting to rest Bam tonight. And that's exactly kind of what it was. Trying to heal up that knee soreness, and then trying to get Jimmy healthy again. But even then, the Miami Heat present a pretty challenging matchup for OKC, specifically given their shooters and their spacing from the outside, some of their playmakers, which we'll dive into. But on the Thunder side, there was something interesting that dropped a couple hours before the game. I want to say it was Clemente of Daily Thunder. He's also with Bricktown Breakdown, the podcast, a bunch of other things. He's doing a really good job covering the team, but he was the first to point out that on the injury report, Bazley was questionable with it just said foot, I believe. And he tweeted something out, and I trust Clemente, so I'm not sure where he got this, but he mentioned something about plantar fasciitis, which obviously is the same exact injury that sidelined Shea for an extended period last season. So then Daigneault comes in his pregame availability. He mentions that it was something that started bothering Bazley this morning, and he's questionable to play, but he really wants to play. Well, long story short, Bazley ends up playing, and thankfully, it didn't seem to really bother him too much. But I bring all that up just to say that's something to kind of monitor. But thankfully, Bazley did play. The Thunder end up starting Bazley, Lou, JRE, Shea, and Getty. It very much seems, Daigneault won't admit it, but it very much seems to me that a starting 5 is starting to form here. For example, we didn't even see Derek Favors tonight. So I think that's something to definitely monitor. JRE is absolutely seeming to get that starting role as well as those minutes, and I think he absolutely should, which we'll dive into that as well. But just looking at the game as a whole, it was a fun one. Honestly, I mean, the Thunder and Heat both started out super hot from the floor. Lou starts out hot again in the first quarter. 10 points in 8 minutes. He had the first 8 points for the Thunder. Some of that consisted of, I think he got a steal at that point and a layup. The Thunder were getting steals and deflections, and that was leading to transition points. Lou got a couple threes that way as well. Lou started out hot yet again, which is a theme we've seen, now 4+ games of 20+ points for Lou Dort, which we'll get into in more depth here in a second. But he keeps starting hot in all these games. I don't think that's a coincidence. The Thunder went on an 11-0 run the first quarter, really fueled by the defense. I mentioned that a little bit when I was talking about Lou, but it led to these transition points, or if it wasn't necessarily like if they don't go down as fast break points on the stat sheet, they still were scoring because they were pushing the ball in transition. I keep mentioning this. I mentioned it last season on this podcast. I mentioned it on Sunday night's podcast, Monday's podcast. If you guys listen to it, the Thunder are at their best when they're pushing the ball in transition. And, we keep hearing about the versatility. That's why you have guys like Baisley, your 4, or shoot, even JRE, your 5, who can grab a rebound and put the ball on the floor if the point guard's not available for an outlet pass, and can continue to push the ball until they find that point guard or that ball handler. Or even Baisley, who can just take it coast to coast. Like that's really important, and an advantage, and a competitive advantage that the Thunder have. And that's one reason that they hung in this game as long as they did and kept it competitive, especially early on. Now, something else in the first quarter I want to mention is Wiggins. Aaron Wiggins, not Andrew Wiggins. Aaron Wiggins was the first sub again for the Thunder, 2 straight games now. And he comes in, had a fantastic first quarter, hits two wide open threes. He had a third that was in and out, and played really solid defense on the other end of the floor as well. So I thought Wiggins played really well early on. From there, he didn't get as much playing time, and when he did in the second half, it wasn't quite. He wasn't really able to get it going. But I kind of chalked that up to be more due to the lineup that he was playing with. But all that to say, that's now 2 straight games where Aaron Wiggins has gotten the minutes of, per se, a Trey Man, right? And I kind of talked about this a little bit again on last night's group podcast, but I think we're going to continue to see that to change throughout the season. But one thing that's stood out and is very apparent is Wiggins seems very NBA ready. Obviously, Trey Man does as well. We're all very excited about Trey Man. There's other players on this team who are struggling. For example, Ty Jerome got quite a few minutes tonight. And I might have, Jacob's going to hate me for this, my co-host Jacob, but I might have rather have seen players like Wiggins and Trey Man get a little more minutes, a little more of those Ty Jerome minutes, specifically Wiggins. But I thought that and then Trey Man not playing a lot right now, but he got some burn earlier last week. Yeah, we're going to continue to see that kind of change throughout the season. But I almost wonder if Wiggins starts to force Daignault's hand and almost forcing him to play him more minutes, because he is so versatile on both ends of the floor, and is kind of Lou Dort-esque in the sense of when Lou was playing with the Blue, it was on that two-way, right? We kind of saw him emerge as somewhat of a two-way player. They're different two-way players, right? But they can play similar roles for this team, and obviously you can never have too many wings. So I'm curious to continue to watch Wiggins' development. Second quarter, though, I'll try and go through these a little quicker, and we'll dive into some themes. And then please, you guys are already dropping some really good comments in the chat. Please continue to do so and drop tons of questions for me, because I'll get to those at the end, especially since I'm going solo here tonight. I really appreciate you guys always dropping in the comments and all the different questions in the chat. So second quarter, the first part of the second quarter was really, really rough. Again, we've been seeing this really since the beginning of the season with Daignault, but he continues to kind of throw in like these hodgepodge lineups, right, of these different young guys needing development minutes, to kind of throw them in all together just to get the minutes, which is fine. But he did have some solid lineups in there as well. It didn't matter. It was like probably, I can't remember off the top of my head, I want to say it was like until about 5 minutes left into the quarter that the starters finally come back in. Not a lot happened for either team, although the Heat did. The Heat's bench, and that was a theme from tonight, was able to hit some outside shots and kind of regain the lead. So the starters come back in and immediately go on a 9-0 run, which was a blast. And to my point earlier, they were getting deflections on the defensive end. They were pushing the ball in transition, hitting outside shots. We saw Getty, while he struggled to score, he was making just some big time passes and plays where he was driving to the rim. And basically, I want to say it was John Hamm who mentioned the BD quote, the Brian Davis quote, for you longtime Thunder fans, of chicken salad out of something else. And that's exactly what Getty was doing. He was driving to the rim, and where it should have been a foul, a turnover, whatever it may be, Getty was able to kick the ball out to open shooters or JRE down low. And that led to that big 9-0 run there in the second quarter, which got the Thunder pretty close at half, tied up at half. I mentioned JRE. I thought he really shined. He had a couple really nice baskets in the post. Like I said, a lot of that was set up by Getty, but I thought JRE looked really good there in the second quarter, and obviously that would continue into the third and fourth quarter. The third quarter starts and just a super hot start from Miami, especially from the three. You have Tyler Hero and Duncan Robinson basically just going crazy. The Thunder actually respond from basically hitting their outside shots from three, even if they didn't shoot well as a whole overnight from the 3-point line. That was how they were able to kind of go on some of these runs, especially here in the fourth quarter. But then the Thunder go cold. They don't I think it was about 6 minutes. I mean, he was almost halfway into the fourth quarter and he finally, sub players in because he knew that his starters needed rest, and it kind of went downhill from there. One thing that I mentioned here is kind of interesting. Getty just had another gorgeous pass that, of course, a Thunder player missed a wide open layup on. Now, typically that's been Favors throughout this season when Getty has a really nice pass that ends up in a miss, a potential assist that he doesn't get. But tonight it was JRE, who was fantastic, had a wide open layup after Josh Getty just dished a perfect bounce pass, a super nice bounce pass down low to him in the post, and JRE missed it. So I bring up this point only to say, are Getty's awesome, fantastic passes cursed? Something to keep an eye on, Thunder fans. Something to keep an eye on. Now, third quarter, OKC had 5 turnovers. He just came out way more aggressive. Now, fourth quarter, I'm not going to even go in way more or into really as much depth, but essentially Tyler Hero took over. Duncan Robinson and Max Strus were continuing to hit outside shots and knock down those threes. The Thunder had plenty of opportunity, especially late in the quarter. The Heat kind of went cold there. The Thunder had opportunities to score on the other side of the floor, and they just could not get shots to fall, especially a lot of that falling on Shai, who I will be critical of tonight only because I know the level of play that Shai can play at, the level of player that he already is and can continue to be. And if he wants to take that next step, he's going to have to find ways to move on from games like tonight, which we're going to get into. But Shai, Getty really struggled to score. Lou was able to get to that 20-point threshold in the fourth quarter, but he even struggled some. Just kind of a rough fourth quarter overall for OKC, which leads us to the 103-90 loss against the Heat. Now, just a couple highlights really quick before we dive into some themes. Season high 26 assists on 34 field goals, which is really interesting because the Thunder end up only shooting, and here we go, I go back to my stats, 34 of 83 from the floor, 41%. That's not terrible, but it's obviously not great. And as well as they were shooting early on from three, they end up only 15 of 41 from three, 36.6%. And yet they still have a season high, see if I can find my notes again, season high assist, 26 assists. And I thought that was really important, especially with Shai struggling as much as he did. I think that's something to really keep an eye on. Baisley, we'll get into that, career high 7 blocks. And as I mentioned a couple different times now, Lou Dort, 4 straight 20-plus games for the first time in his career. That comes straight from the Thunder themselves. So, if you guys have listened to this podcast before, our loyal listeners know we all do our post games a little different. I always like to do negatives and positives. And I don't say positives and negatives because we always start with the negatives and we end on the positives. So let's go ahead and jump into some of the negatives before we end on some of the positives. And I actually have more positives from this game, believe it or not, than negatives. Now, my first negative, and this is kind of interesting because this is also a player I have in my positives, which we'll get into later. But Josh Giddey's shooting struggles. We talked a lot about this, again, on Sunday night's podcast, and we've kind of mentioned this throughout the previous week. Josh Giddey was looking really well there early on, getting that floater to go. He was knocking the occasional outside shot, the 3-point shot down, like I said, on occasion, but really he was driving to the rim. He was struggling to finish around the rim, ironically enough, but was still driving enough and able to get to the rim enough where he was finishing. And then, like I said, that floater and mid-range shot was falling for him. But now teams have, rightfully so, scouted OKC and know that Shai and Getty and even Dort love to drive to the rim and try and finish around the rim. So you see, like tonight, where you have one of the most physical teams in the league, the Miami Heat, also long and athletic, packing the paint, right? And we're going to get into the defense that they played against the Thunder, the different looks they threw at them, but that really threw off a player like Getty. And so what Getty's going to need to have to do now in this next step is adapt to these defenses and these teams scouting him, the different looks that they're throwing at him. Now, we kind of saw that in last night's game against the Brooklyn Nets. Getty shot 7 3-point shots. Obviously didn't look great. We kind of saw that again tonight. Looking up his 3-point attempts right now. Yeah, 5 tonight. He was 5 from 3. Just, again, has that really strange form. Not great balance. We see him kind of twisting his body, kicking that foot out. And I think a lot of that is because he's not getting his legs into his shot. He doesn't have the necessary power yet to get, still trying to adjust to the 3-point length of the NBA. And that's why we're seeing him kind of do that weird twist, or see that weird thing where he's like sticking his leg out in his shot because he's trying to gain more power. What he's going to have to do is, this sounds ridiculous, but hip flexibility, right? He's going to have to bend his knees more and gain more strength in his legs. I think that's going to help him a lot, because almost every single shot, I tweeted this from our podcast account tonight, almost every single three, specifically tonight, but really over the ever since he's come in the league, just line drives, right? Very flat, and finding more flexibility, more balance in his shot, I think is going to really help that a lot. He has a pretty solid release. He's just going to have to work on that balance and gain some more power, which I think he can get from his legs. So that'll be something to kind of monitor. But I think he also can adjust to these defenses as he just gets more and more looks, right? He can continue to drive and find open teammates, but there was times where they were just swarming him, and he had nowhere to go. Essentially, he's going to have to add some moves, like we've seen Shea do. Right, he's going to have to become a little more crafty around the rim as well, which I think Getty can do. So I'm really excited to kind of see how Getty responds here over the next week. Even I think we're going to see a little bit of growth and development from him. So that was my first negative, was just Getty's shooting struggles specifically, not Getty as a whole. My second is actually a team-wide theme. The Thunder are currently 29th, only above the Rockets in offensive rating, with an offensive rating of 99.4. Now, I believe that wasn't updated for this game, but I highly, highly doubt that's changed for either team, as the Rockets continue to look even worse than the Thunder, if we're being completely honest. But again, not a great offensive performance so far for this Thunder team early on this season. Now, I bring that up because tonight they're only 15 of 41 from three. They were only 15 of 41 from three, and only 34 of 83 from the field. And I mentioned the Heat's defense, right? So we're going to dive into that a little bit. The Heat recognized this pretty early on. Obviously, they scouted this team, and they went to a 2-3 matchup zone. And a matchup zone, essentially, in a nutshell, this is a very brief description. There's much smarter basketball minds than me who can describe this in more detail. But essentially, an on-ball defender plays man, while the rest of the defense, the other teammates are playing more of a zone coverage defense and zone type rotations, rather than playing man-to-man on all five players. And that really threw the Thunder off. Now, not only that, but the Heat also threw about a three-quarter, I don't want to call it a full court press, but it was more of like a three-quarter press, court press, where they were trapping ball handlers. And they threw that at the second unit of the Thunder when they were playing a primarily bench-only lineup, right? When you don't have ball handlers like Shea and Getty in there, they knew that they could frustrate some of these young Thunder players. They were taking advantage of their youth, and it worked. The very first time they threw it out there, Poku had a turnover, right? So all that to say, it gave Thunder all kinds of trouble. And a lot of that has to do with their youth, I think. But the fact that they're unable to knock down outside shots, we saw them trying to attack that zone and kick out to open shooters, but you're going to have more spacing. And now that's where I was a little frustrated. Again, Daigneault's been fantastic all season, in my personal opinion, and so far in the early season. But I would have liked to see, I know Bazley played really well. I actually have him in my positives. He's playing really good defense. But I would have liked to see more like JRE at the 4, like Daigneault has mentioned in the past, playing alongside a stretch big, a stretch 5, like Mike Muscala. And we didn't really see that. It almost seemed like Daigneault was prioritizing player development tonight, which I think is great and is fine. But that led to a lack of spacing and some difficulty breaking down that zone defense. So all that to say, the Thunder's offense again tonight was a big negative, and the Heat took full advantage of that. And I think that was a big key to why the Thunder fell to the Heat like they did in the second half. So my last negative and this is kind of related. I've alluded to this a lot so far in this podcast. And look, SGA, I think he's flirting with superstar, right? I think if he can kind of snap out of this, I think he will have a chance at making a all-star roster, although it will be difficult just due to the team he's playing on. But SGA's been not doing so well. I mentioned Getty needing to adjust to some of the defenses that these teams are throwing at him. SGA falls into a similar boat. Only 10 points on 2 of 11 shooting tonight. I think the thing and I get it, right? He's trying to set up teammates, and that's good as well, but only 11 shot attempts from SGA tonight. It's going to be tough to beat teams when your best player is only shooting the ball 11 times, and obviously only 2 of 11 from the floor. Very frustrated, which was a theme for SGA. In the last 5 games, Shea has shot only 31 of 84 from the floor, basically 37%. And a lot of that, like I said, is due to defenses adjusting and opposing teams adjusting and scouting not only Shea, but this team as a whole. They know that Shea, Getty, Dort, arguably the 3 best offensive players for OKC, love to drive to the rim and try to generate offense that way. And we're going to have to see how these guys adjust. We saw Shea try and go to that step back, that side step 3 that he has some tonight. Just could not get it going. We saw that as well last night against the Nets. Couldn't get it going. It's just not a highly efficient shot. It's also a very tough shot to hit. And we know he can hit it. When he gets that going, he's going to have nights where it just doesn't even matter what opposing defenses do. That's going to open up the floor for the entire team. But man, there were just some really ill-advised bad shots that he was taking tonight, especially there in the fourth quarter. The Thunder were able to come back from 18, cut it to a 8-point game, and Shea goes down. And look, I'm not super upset with his decision to do this because we've seen in the past couple of seasons, not even so far this season, where Shea's able to do that, get warm, essentially come back and help the Thunder win a game. But in the just not in the flow in the offense, again, the Thunder had just cut it down to like 8 points. Maybe it was at 10 points at this point. And then Shea has another one of those sidestep threes that it was super long, wasn't even close, just very early in the shot clock. Those aren't the kind of shots you want Shea to get. And again, I think a lot of that comes from frustration, which leads me to my next point on Shea. And this is something that my co-host Jacob mentioned in our uncontested Slack that we have. His defense was very concerning tonight. Not a lot of effort on that end of the floor. A lot of standing around, a lot of, dare I say, Russell Westbrook-esque defense on that end of the floor. And it seemed like that that was a result of his frustrations on the offensive end. And look, Shea's a great leader. Again, a leader by example. Everybody looks up to him. But you don't want to see that from your best player on the other end of the floor. I love Russ. He's still my favorite player in the entire world. Those of you on the live stream, I have my microphone in the way, but that picture back there is of Russell Westbrook that I have framed here in the office. But us Thunder fans are scarred from having our best player on the team refusing to play defense on the defensive end of the floor. And so maybe we're just a little prone to being, or maybe that's like a sore subject. But I would like to see Shea be much more aggressive on that end. And it's frustrating that he let his offensive struggles affect his play on the defensive end because he has the physical tools and the basketball IQ to be a solid defender. And unfortunately, he just doesn't always put the effort on that end of the floor. Now, I get that you have to have a balance there, right? He's got to save effort somewhere, save energy somewhere. But still, I mean, what he was doing tonight was very lackluster, as I mentioned earlier. And somebody actually replied to a tweet that Jacob and I were going back and forth on my account. I think I tagged him or something. And somebody mentioned his rebounding as well. Not that you want every single guard to be like Josh Giddey crashing the boards every time. Like you want your guards to be able to get back on defense. I get that. But there were some plays where Shea was down low, just letting the defense go right past him for rebounds, right? Or even on the other end of the floor, he's going down low he's in position to get a rebound, but he's just standing straight up and letting the Heat go and get offensive second chance points. And that's unacceptable from your star player. And that's somewhere that I personally would like to see Shea improve. So enough with the negatives. Again, I don't mean to just harp on Shea. He's the best player on this team. He's the cornerstone moving forward. I mean, he's been struggling recently and still has had like 20 plus points in the past couple of games up until tonight. So just things to monitor moving forward, and ways that I think, or I guess things I think that Shea can improve on. But we're going to transition here to some positives. This is the best part because I think there are more positives than negatives. And I would be remiss if I did not mention the one and only Lou Jensen Dort first. Again, longtime listeners know how high I am on Lou. I just really enjoy the way he plays the game. His ferociousness really on both ends of the floor, especially the defensive end. But what we're seeing is he's really putting it together on both ends. And on the offensive end of the floor, he's doing so while still playing in more of a rhythm with the offense. And I think that's really important. His fourth straight game, as I mentioned, of 20 plus points. That's the first time in his career, or the longest consecutive 20 plus point games in his career. He's finishing around the rim better. We keep mentioning this, but again, he had, I think his very first points tonight were dunks. And I want to say, this is off the top of my head, I didn't track this, so you guys can correct me. I want to say he had 3 dunks tonight. We're seeing him, I think him shedding some of the weight that he did, obviously still remaining very big, but shedding some of the weight that he did in the offseason. We all noticed that he looked a little slimmer while still obviously very, very bulky and wiry. But I think that's allowed him to be a little more explosive. And maybe he's just worked on his vertical as well. Players do that in the offseason also, but it's resulted to him being able to finish around the rim a lot better. And also he's just finishing through contact better. For example, the play that stands out to me the most. Oh, hey, side note, my Golden Hurricanes beat Oregon State 64-58 in basketball, baby. Keep an eye on those Hurricanes. Back to the Thunder, though, and Lou Dort. There's this play where he went down low, basically lowered his shoulder, which is bold, especially when Lou has as many fouls as he does. Tonight he only had 2, thankfully, but lowers his shoulder essentially with PJ Tucker on him and just moves PJ Tucker out of the way. There's not very many players in the entire league who can do that. He's able to finish through contact. That's big time. That's really big time. And the other thing, obviously, is the 3-point shot. He was 50% from the floor. 50% from 3 again tonight. 4 of 8. Actually, he was 50% from the floor as well. 8 of 16 from the floor. 4 of 8. I do love seeing Lou take 16 shots, especially on nights where Shea doesn't have it going. But again, I think that is time. I would like to see Shea get more shot attempts. Would maybe like to see Lou's shot attempts go down on average. But tonight, where he has it going, I don't mind that at all. 4 of 8 from the floor. 4 of 8 from 3. That 3-point shot is legit. Now, look, I'm not saying he's going to continue to play like he has over the past 4 or 5 games, or shoot like he has from 3 during that time frame. He's going to have some valleys again moving forward. But I think what we're seeing is he's a respectable 2-way player. And he's made some real leaps on that end of the floor while still being able to maintain his defensive intensity. And that's really, really important for this Thunder team moving forward. Not even just this season, obviously, but as a kind of, I don't want to say a cornerstone like Shea, obviously, but just another player that you can really build around. And I'm really, very, really optimistic and excited about what we've seen from Dort on the offensive end and how he's not let that affect his defense. My next positive, I mentioned this earlier, Darius Bazley, his defense, his switchability, his versatility on the defensive end has been really impressive. This is something that the Thunder have seen in him since the very beginning, and we're seeing it kind of come together and be more consistent, especially on the defensive end of the floor. He was huge for this Thunder team through some of those stretches where the Thunder were going on runs, because we saw Miami obviously hitting all those outside shots with all their perimeter shooters. Bazley comes out, is able to guard in the perimeter. He has a career high 5 blocks. Through like 3.5 quarters, he had tied his career high of 4 blocks. He gets his 5th one later on in the 4th quarter. And almost all there were, I want to say 2 of them were in the paint. That, again, that's off the top of my head and could be incorrect. Those are the 2 that I'm thinking of. I want to say the rest of those came from the perimeter when he was guarding those 3-point shooters. And that's really, really important for this team. Again, while I would have liked to see more space in some of these lineups, I understand why Daigneault is throwing Bazley out there in those moments, because he's playing so well defensively. Offensively, he continues to play well and more in rhythm of the offense. But as Jacob mentioned in our Slack as well, he has just like 3 or 4 great back-to-back possessions where he's playing within the offense. He's getting good shots down low. He's making the right plays and passes. He's playing great defense. And then he comes down, when the Thunder have cut it to 8 points or whatever, and has to play a one-on-one hero ball again where he just completely stops the offense and throws up some contested 3 or mid-range shot. And would really like to see him kind of weed those shots out of his game. But what we are seeing more consistently, and again, that's one of the biggest things I think that Daydalt keeps mentioning with Bazley, is his consistency. He is playing more consistent on both ends of the floor. And tonight, while he didn't have the best offensive night, still had 7 points, 7 rebounds, 5 blocks, and just played some of the best defense maybe we've seen from Bazley in a while, which is really important for this team moving forward. I'm just really curious to continue to watch Bazley's development. It's such a critical year for him and his development and his career, and critical, I think, for OKC as well moving forward. When you have a lot of talented forwards in this upcoming draft that the Thunder might be forced to take, take the best player available. That could be a forward that would be competing with minutes for Bazley. So I'm just curious, how versatile is he? Can you play him at the 4 or 5? I don't know. Deeper conversation as a season continues to develop. But continue to keep an eye on Bazley. And I really liked what I saw from him tonight, especially defensively. He's a positive for me. Now, JRE. Look, I love Getty. But JRE has been such I don't even know if I should say surprise. We knew he was very fundamental, right? A little bit of an older guy in terms of rookies. Comes from Villanova. We know he's going to be fundamentally sound. But man, he is really, really impressed. 16 points tonight, 6 of 11 from the floor. 4 of 6 from 3, which is huge. Being able to stretch the floor like that and still be able to provide the defensive presence that he's able to on the other end, guarding some of the opposing team's biggest players, their centers, is just huge. And Mark's mentioned this, but being able to play JR, you can play him at the 4 or the 5 right now, right? If you need more spacing, you can throw Muscala out there and have JRE in there at the 4 and just have tons of spacing and still really solid defense. If you want more of an interior presence, you could throw in like a Favors, who didn't play tonight, by the way. But you could throw in a Favors alongside JRE, play him at the 4. And again, tons of great defense in that lineup. It gives you more interior defense. But on the offensive end of the floor, JRE provides spacing. That is huge for this team moving forward. And I've loved every minute that JRE has played. I don't even know what details to go into with him, just because he was so fun to watch tonight. And he's really kind of getting a stride and finding his role on this team. And I think there's a reason that we've seen JRE starting more than any other center on this roster now. I think that's going to continue. I think JRE will be a starter for this team for the season long term, and will be just a critical piece moving forward with this Thunder rebuild. Now, Josh Giddey, I mentioned him in my negatives. I said that I also had him in my positives. He's impacted the game even while struggling to score, and that's something that a lot of rookies aren't able to do, right? That's something we've seen SGA be able to do when he's been struggling. Like I mentioned over the past couple of games, he's still getting teammates involved. He's still impacting the game at a high level. We're seeing Giddey do that as well. Obviously, the box score tells the story there, as Giddey has only 6 points on 3 of 10 shooting, but he has 9 rebounds, 9 assists. He had only 2 blocks. I thought his steals were higher than that. He only had 1 steal, but regardless, Giddey is able to set up his teammates, create for others, even when he's struggling. He looked visibly frustrated out there. You can tell he's struggling with the length and versatility and strength that some of the best teams in the league, like the Brooklyn Nets and Miami Heat, have thrown at him. But it's just such great learning experience for him. I'm not concerned about him long-term at all. I think he's going to learn from these experiences. He's going to sit down and see the film, be able to adjust. And the fact that he's still able to, again, to use the Brian Davis term that John Hamm threw out there today, make chicken salad of something else when he's struggling like that, and still be able to find open teammates and continue to get teammates involved and impact the game at a high level as a rookie. Even just his strength, I think, kind of stood out to me tonight. Both, he still struggles defensively with foot speed, but he's able to use his strength to defend some elite offensive players on the Heat. And on the offensive end, obviously, he uses that strength to be able to, what would otherwise be a jump ball, he's able to break through defenders and make passes, get the ball to open teammates. That's been really impressive to me. And my dad was texting me and my little brother about Getty, and I was kind of giving him a hard time earlier. He said, I'm joking. Getty's unorthodox, but he makes things happen, and that's really important. And I loved how my dad that wasn't word for word. I'll see if I can find that. Not the smoothest player. And he said, I'm teasing the rookie. He's getting it done, but he's unorthodox. And he is. He is. And I think that's actually a great thing. And that kind of sums up some of the players that Presti has been scouting and trying to bring onto this team, right? This is, in many ways, an unorthodox team and an unorthodox rebuild. And I love every second of it. And that brings me to my last positive here. Alexei Pokushevsky, speaking of unorthodox, gave some fantastic minutes tonight. Plus his last couple of games, he's had a great stretch here where he's playing within the offense. I think the direct contrast to Baisley and how this coaching staff is handling Baisley's development versus Poku. Last season they gave Poku kind of full reign there at the end of the season. This season they're honing him in because they don't want him to play out of control. They know that Poku will take just about anything if they let him. They wanted to kind of tighten the screws, I think is the way that Dignall called it. And we've seen it work even this early on, right? The past 3 or 4 games, he's provided great stretches for this team, especially tonight. 15 minutes, I believe. Sorry, I'm going to have to go back to my box score here. But 14 minutes. Wait. 16 minutes. There we go. 16 minutes, 5 of 6 from the floor, 11 points. I think the impressive thing with Poku, and we've kind of been talking about this in our uncontested group as well, he's playing some pretty decent defense. He's really gaining strides on that end of the floor. He's able to use his length, even if he's not as quick as some of these perimeter players that he's guarding. He's often guarding, especially during this last stretch of games, he's guarding opposing guards. And he's doing a really good job using his length and versatility to go out there and contend shots and to not allow players to drive by him. That's been really impressive. Also, his off-ball defense, I've been keeping an eye on. He's really great about kind of dropping back, almost like a free safety, right? And he knows he has that length and versatility to get those hands in passing lanes and deflect passes. And we saw a lot of that tonight. But the offensive end of the floor, man, I mean, he had 2 wide open threes that he drilled within the offense. He was driving and creating for others. We saw maybe my favorite play of the game of Poku was, he had a couple breakaway dunks where he was running in transition, which is great to see. But then he also had a nice little mid-range where he crossed somebody up on the perimeter, took one long Poku dribble to the free throw line, pulled up and just nailed the mid-range. That's just fantastic stuff from Poku. And that's kind of what I think Presti, Dignall, this franchise envisions for Poku long term. And I think, we saw Poku rewarded for that tonight when he played the majority of the fourth quarter with the starters. And at one point, I want to say like Kendricks was in there instead of somebody else as well. But regardless, Poku earned those minutes. And Dignall, I think, knew, that Poku could provide offense that the Thunder didn't really have going. Also, Dignall did I mentioned this earlier, Dignall did kind of seem to prioritize player development maybe rather than throwing out like the correct quote unquote lineups tonight, which is fine. And Poku really benefited from that. I'm really excited to continue to watch his development throughout the season as well, because I thought tonight was just great Poku minutes on both ends of the floor. So all of that to say, even though it was a loss, there was a lot of positive things to take from this game. I'm going to quickly go through some of the chat, some of the comments, and some of the questions, and then we'll go ahead and get out of here as the Thunder have a very busy week ahead. Joseph mentioned that Getty has to clean up his shooting. Yes, definitely. I talked a lot about that. Nate Sanders, he's got to clean up everything that's not passing. That is also fair. Let's see. Joseph did mention with Lou, he needs to stop trying to make plays, though. I get that. I do, but I think it is important for Lou to continue to drive rather than just knowing for opposing teams knowing that he's going to try and finish around the rim or draw contact, whatever it may be. It's important for Lou to continue to work on that playmaking and finding open shooters. That's kind of the next step in his development as well. To have a third playmaker like that on this team alongside Getty and Shea, I think is really important. It's going to open up the floor more for these guys, and you won't see as much of the Miami Heat and Brooklyn Nets packing the paint like this because, Lou will be able to play make. That's really important for this team as a whole. So I'll push back a little bit there. Marcus Kruger, 21-year-old rookie Jason Kidd, 33.8 minutes, 4.2 field goals made, 10.8 field goals attempted, 38.5% from the floor, basically 70% from the free throw line, 27% from three. Weird times. 11.7 points, 5.4 rebounds, 7.7 assists, 1.9 steals. 19-year-old Josh Getty. So less minutes, 28.6 minutes per game. Less field goals made, 3.8 compared to 4.2 with Kidd. Field goal attempts about the same, 10.2 for Getty, 10.8 for Jason Kidd. But Getty is shooting at 37.7% from the floor. Kidd was 38.5%. About the same from the free throw, a little less, about 8% less, I guess. 28.9% from three. That's interesting. Yeah, so a little better than Jason Kidd, which makes sense. Different era of the NBA. But so 9.3 points for Getty compared to 11.7 for Kidd. 6.4 rebounds compared to 5.4 rebounds per Kidd. Versus Kidd. 5.9 assists compared to 7.7 assists per versus Kidd. And about the same steals, about the same blocks. That's really interesting. Very interesting. Jason Kidd, for context, Kidd won co-rookie of the year in 1994, 1995. And yeah, Getty's on track to have very similar stats. That's very promising and a lot of fun. If you compare Kidd and Getty's first 13 games, Marcus continues Getty's percentages and per game averages are better than Kidd's, and Kidd played 35.8 minutes per game versus 28.6 per Getty. Really good stuff there, Marcus. I like that a lot, and that's a pretty fun comparison there as well in terms of the role that Getty could find himself in long term with this franchise. Let's see. Joseph mentioned that he is already sold on Getty. He has to fix his footwork. I mentioned that when I talked about his shot. And let's see. Stone Weaver mentioned great game from Poku. He looks much more calm and control with the ball, facing up against the defense and taking his time. I think that's a really good point as well, Stone. I didn't mention that aspect. I kind of alluded to it, but I think you worded that perfectly. And when you mentioned taking his time, right? He's the game's slowing down for him. I think that's really important. Well, thank you all for tuning in. This was a fun one to break down, even if the Thunder lost. Really appreciate you all continuing to tune in to our live streams and engaging with us on Twitter and all of our socials. We just really appreciate it and continuing to listen in general. We continue to see our downloads go up. We're just very appreciative of you all and appreciate all of your support. Again, tonight, the Thunder lose their second straight on the second night of back-to-back, 103-90 against the Miami Heat. Again, a very big week ahead from the Thunder. We'll have you covered every step of the way. Wednesday night, they play the Rockets at home before they go on a bit of a road trip against the Bucks on Friday, and another back-to-back against the Celtics on Saturday night. I was listening to the broadcast earlier. They mentioned that while obviously there's going to be some tough stretches for the Thunder throughout the rest of the season, this is by far the busiest, jam-packed week of basketball for the Thunder. So as us Thunder fans, we should enjoy it. And as you uncontested fans, you all should tune in and keep it here because we will have you covered for every game, every post game, everything in between. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us. I'll try and continue to do some highlight videos, be a little more active there. You can find us on TikTok. You can find us on Instagram, obviously Twitter. Continue to tune in whenever you listen to your podcast. Thank you all again. And until next time, Thunder up.